Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready.
Awesome. Well, today we're tackling the Middle East.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big one.
It is, and things are moving so fast it's hard to keep up with all the headlines.
Totally.
So we're using a recent analysis from Kings and Generals to try and understand what's really going on, the big picture.
I like it. Kings and generals, they always dig up some interesting stuff.
For sure. And they found some pretty wild things this time, too. Like, did you hear about the Mossad taking out Hezbollah leaders with exploding pagers?
Wait, what? Exploding pagers? Really?
Yeah. Seriously, how crazy is that?
That's wild. Like something out of a spy movie.
I know, right? It's like they were playing the long game.
Speaking of long games, what's the latest on the situation in Gaza? Where do things stand right now?
Well, Israel's saying they've hit Hamas hard, like really disrupted their military. They claim they're controlling important areas in Gaza.
I see.
But the images coming out of Gaza are really tough to see. There's just so much destruction there.
Yeah, that's the thing. No matter who's winning or losing, the human cost is always so high. All those casualties, the homers destroyed. It's really hard to grasp the impact on the people caught in the middle of it all.
Absolutely. And you have to wonder, how do you build peace when there's been so much suffering?
Yeah.
It just seems like it would create more resentment, not less.
Exactly. It almost feels like it would just fuel more conflict down the road.
Right. It's a vicious cycle.
Speaking of cycles, there's talk of a ceasefire.
Oh, yeah, I read something about that.
Egypt and Qatar are trying to broker a deal. It would happen in stages. Hostages released, aid gets in, and then Israeli troops would gradually withdraw.
Okay, so that sounds hopeful. Is there a real chance for peace here?
It's hard to tell. It seems like Hamas is on board with the plan.
That's good, right?
Yeah, but there's pushback within Israel. Some people want Hamas completely wiped out before any kind of deal is made.
Wow, so like zero tolerance.
Pretty much. It's a tough situation for everyone involved, especially for Netanyahu.
Yeah, I bet. Trying to balance all those different demands with the whole world watching.
It's got to be incredibly stressful. There are protests happening in Israel demanding those hostages back, and, the pressure is just mounting.
I can't even imagine.
And keep in mind, Gaza is just one piece of the puzzle. Things are also escalating with Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Right. I remember we talked about that simmering tension in our last deep dive. But it seems like things have changed. Israel's taking a much tougher stance now, right?
They are. It's not just about containing Hezbollah anymore. Israel's talking about completely dismantling the group and allowing those displaced residents near the border to return home.
So that explains the exploding pagers then. It was all part of a bigger plan.
It seems that way. And the pagers were just the start. Israel has launched airstrikes, and there's even a ground assault happening in Lebanon.
So is this basically a repeat of the 2006 war?
There are definitely some similarities. Like the fighting is happening in some of the same areas.
Sure.
And the IDF, Israel's military, hasn't deployed a huge ground force yet.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember that Hezbollah is putting up a strong fight.
They are.
Oh, yeah. They even ambushed one of those elite Israeli commando units.
Whoa, so they're not backing down at all.
Nope. It shows how capable they are. They're a real force to be reckoned with. This whole situation is incredibly volatile. One wrong move could trigger a chain reaction with serious consequences.
It's scary to think about. And then you have Iran in the background, which makes it even more complicated.
That's the big one. It really could change everything. The conflict between Israel and Iran's been building for years,
Yeah, it goes way back.
So first you had Israel bombing that Iranian embassy in Damascus. Then Iran retaliated with those missiles. And now it's this constant back and forth.
Tit for tat.
Exactly. But that recent missile attack from Iran, that was different. Kings and Generals described it as massive. It was a whole other level of escalation.
What were they even targeting?
It was like a coordinated attack with tons of ballistic missiles. They went after key Israeli bases, like the Nevatim Air Base, where they think Israel keeps its F-35s, and the Tel Naf Air Base, where they suspect they have nuclear weapons.
Seriously?
Yeah, it was a direct hit at Israel's military capabilities.
So how much damage did they actually do?
That's still unclear.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Iran claims they destroyed a whole bunch of F-35s, but there's no evidence to support that. Israel probably got wind of the attack and moved its most important stuff out of the way.
That makes sense.
As for the nuclear facilities, it's hard to say. Those places are probably pretty well protected.
Yeah, you'd think so.
So there are still a lot of unknowns. But what is clear is that Iran can hit Israel hard, and that changes the whole game.
Definitely. The stakes just got a lot higher, so what happens now?
Well, the whole world's waiting to see how Israel responds. They've promised retaliation.
Oh, wow.
They have a lot of options, They could hit Iran air defenses or their missile launchers. They could even go after their nuclear program or their oil infrastructure.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on. Targeting nuclear or oil facilities.
Yeah.
That could have huge consequences, not just for the Middle East, but for everyone.
Exactly. That's why everyone's urging Israel to be careful, to respond proportionally. No one wants this to spiral out of control.
It's like everyone's holding their breath,
Right.
waiting to see what happens next. And we haven't even touched on the potential fallout from all of this.
It's a lot to process, for sure. And to really grasp what's going on, we need to understand the historical context. We'll dig into that in part 2, so stay tuned.
You got it. Looking forward to it.
It's so easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day news, but to really understand what's going on, we have to step back
Yeah.
and look at the historical context.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This isn't just some random explosion of violence. These conflicts, they go way back.
Yeah, that's what's so cool about these deep dives. Right?
Exactly.
It's not just skimming the surface. It's like we're going deep.
We're going deep, yeah.
Understanding all the underlying stuff that's driving this situation.
Yeah, for sure. Take the conflict between Israel and Iran, for example. It's been going on for decades. Fueled by ideological differences, geopolitical rivalries, just a deep mistrust on both sides.
Yeah, for sure. And then, on top of that, you have the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has been going on for over a century.
Right.
The recent war in Gaza is just the latest chapter in this long and tragic story.
It's true. And it's each conflict feeds into the others, creating this complex web of tension.
Yeah.
I mean, the war in Gaza emboldens Hezbollah. Iran sees an opportunity
To get involved.
to assert its influence. Yeah, and the whole region just becomes this tinderbox.
It really does. Okay, so we've got this super complex situation with a lot of moving pieces.
A lot of moving pieces, yeah.
So what are the potential future scenarios here? What does kings and generals think could happen next?
Well, it's tough to predict the future with any kind of certainty.
Yeah.
But based on their analysis, there are a few possible scenarios.
Okay.
One scenario is that Israel just launches a limited retaliatory strike against Iran, targeting maybe military installations or infrastructure linked to their missile program.
Okay.
This could lead to a tit-for-tat escalation with both sides, exchanging blows but avoiding a full-blown war.
So kind of like a tense stalemate, but wouldn't that just prolong the tension and keep everyone on edge?
Yeah, potentially. It's possible. Another scenario is that Israel just decides to go all in and try to cripple Iran's nuclear program.
Wow.
Which, that would be a high-risk gamble because that could easily trigger a massive regional war.
With unpredictable consequences.
Unpredictable consequences.
I can't even imagine the devastation.
Right.
And let's not forget about Lebanon. What if things spiral out of control there?
Absolutely. If the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah intensifies, it could easily draw in other regional powers. You could see Syria getting involved, potentially even a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran on Lebanese soil.
Right.
And then, of course, you have the wild card of, other non-state actors like Hamas who might see this as an opportunity, right?
To what?
To exploit the chaos and, further their own agenda.
It's almost too much to think about. It sounds like we're teetering on the brink of something truly catastrophic.
It really has.
Is there any hope for a peaceful resolution here?
It's tough to be optimistic given, how things are right now, but it's important to remember that even in the darkest of times, diplomacy, dialogue, those things can offer a glimmer of hope.
Okay, so what would that look like? What kind of international intervention or diplomatic efforts could maybe potentially help de-escalate the situation?
Well, for starters, you would need a concerted effort from the international community, including the major powers like U.S., Russia, China, to pressure all sides to come to the negotiating table. There would have to be a willingness to compromise, a real commitment to finding a lasting solution that actually addresses the underlying grievances,
That sounds like a tall order, especially given the deep mistrust and, all the historical baggage that exists between these parties.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine them sitting down together and actually finding common ground.
It is. It's a challenge, but it's not impossible. We've seen diplomatic breakthroughs in, seemingly intractable conflicts before
Yeah.
we have. It requires strong leadership,
Mhm.
creative thinking, a genuine desire for peace.
Yeah, yeah. What about the UN? Could they play a more active role in, like, mediating a solution? Isn't that what they're there for?
They could definitely play a role, but their effectiveness is, often limited by the political interests of its member states.
Right.
For any kind of UN-led peace initiative to actually succeed, you'd need a unified front from the Security Council.
Hmm.
And that's not always easy to achieve, especially when you have powerful countries with, conflicting interests.
Yeah. Like the U.S., who's traditionally been a strong ally of Israel, and then Russia, who has close ties to Iran. And it seems like their interests would always be at odds.
Exactly. So it's a very delicate diplomatic dance. But I think the key is to keep those channels of communication open, to explore every possible avenue for peaceful resolution.
Yeah.
You can't give up hope.
Because the alternative is just, like, too terrifying to even think about.
A full-scale war in the Middle East would be a disaster for everyone involved. It would lead to unimaginable human suffering, destabilize the whole region, and potentially drag in global powers. And, that could have catastrophic consequences.
It's a stark reminder that our world is so interconnected.
Right.
And finding peaceful solutions to these complex conflicts, it's so important.
It is, and it affects all of us. You can't just ignore what's happening in the Middle East, no matter how far away it may seem. I couldn't agree more. What happens in one part of the world inevitably affects us all. And we have a collective responsibility to, work towards a more peaceful and just future.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential for escalation, the need for diplomacy, the importance of international cooperation. What are some of the key factors that will, like, determine how this situation unfolds in the coming weeks and months? Like, what should we be paying attention to?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to keep a close eye on Israel's response to that Iranian missile attack.
Okay.
Will they go for like a limited retaliation, or are they going to choose a more aggressive course of action? Their decision will have a major impact on the trajectory of the conflict.
Right, and there's the internal political situation in Israel, right?
Yeah.
Netanyahu's facing pressure from, both hawks and doves within his own government.
Exactly. How he navigates those competing pressures will be crucial.
For sure.
And we also need to pay attention to the international response, right?
Yeah.
Will the U.S. continue to urge restraint, or will they, give Israel more leeway to act? And what about the other key players like Russia, China, the European Union? Will they step up their diplomatic efforts, or are they going to kind of stay on the sidelines?
Yeah. And we can't forget about the situation on the ground in Lebanon and Gaza.
Right.
Like the intensity of the fighting and the humanitarian situation in those areas.
Absolutely. It's all going to play a significant role in shaping the broader conflict. It's easy to get overwhelmed by like the complexity of all of this, but I think it's really important to remember that behind all the, geopolitical maneuvering and the military strategy, there are real people whose lives are being like torn apart by these conflicts.
That's such an important point.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get like caught up in the abstract analysis.
Right.
But we can't lose sight of the human cost of war.
The human cost, yeah.
The casualties, the displacement, the trauma, like shattered lives. These are the real consequences of these conflicts, and we should never forget that.
And it's not just about the immediate impact either, These conflicts have long-lasting consequences. They shape the political landscape, they fuel extremism,
Right.
they create cycles of violence that can like persist for generations.
Yeah, it's a heavy burden for that entire region to bear.
It's a sobering thought, but I think it's an important one to keep in mind as we try to, make sense of this complex and an ever-evolving situation.
Yeah, well said. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point.
Exactly.
It's meant to give you, the listener, the tools and the context to kind of, continue exploring this topic on your own. It's kind of crazy how interconnected everything is over there in the Middle East. We've got like the war in Gaza, the Hezbollah situation, the potential conflict with Iran. It's like one thing leads to another.
Yeah, for sure. It's a bit of a domino effect, What happens in one place definitely has consequences elsewhere, and not just in the region either.
Exactly. So let's like zoom out for a sec and talk about the bigger picture. What does all this mean for the Middle East in general? And what about the rest of the world? What are the global consequences?
Well, I mean, in the Middle East, we're already seeing a lot of instability, a lot of insecurity. These conflicts cause displacement, hurt economies, and just add to the existing tension. Like, look at Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia.
Hmm.
They're all pretty nervous about what's next.
Right. And of course, we have to talk about the humanitarian side of things. I mean,
Right.
we've discussed the destruction in Gaza, but you've also got tons of people displaced in Lebanon. It's just heartbreaking to think about the human cost of all of this.
It really is. The suffering is immense. And beyond the immediate impact, there are long-term consequences to consider as well.
Like what specifically?
Well, conflict zones can often become, breeding grounds for extremism and radicalization. When people are desperate and feel like there's no hope, they're more likely to listen to extremist groups who, offer these simple solutions to complex problems. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's like pouring gas on a fire.
Exactly. And it's not just a regional issue either. Extremist ideologies don't really respect borders. Especially in today's world with the internet and social media, things spread fast. So what starts as a local conflict can easily have a ripple effect around the world.
That's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah.
So what can we do to break this cycle of violence? How do we stop these conflicts from spreading even further? I mean, it seems like a huge task.
It is a big challenge. But I think a good place to start is addressing the root causes, the underlying issues that are driving these conflicts in the first place.
You're talking about stuff like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the economic disparities, the lack of political representation for certain groups.
Exactly. These are issues that have been around for a long time, and there aren't any easy answers. But if we want peace in the region, if we want stability, we have to find a way to address those issues.
That's the long-term goal. But what about right now? What can we do to stop things from escalating? Keep it from becoming a global conflict.
Diplomacy, international cooperation, that's got to be the focus. We need the international community, the US, Russia, China, everyone, to put pressure on all the parties involved and get them to the negotiating table.
What about the UN? Can't they do more?
The UN definitely has a role to play, but they're only as effective as their member states allow them to be. They need everyone on the Security Council on the same page, working together, and that can be tough with so many competing interests.
Yeah, it's like herding cats. Everyone has their own agenda. But it still feels like the best option, right? The alternative is just too terrible to think about.
A full-blown regional war in the Middle East would be awful for everyone. Unimaginable suffering, the whole region would be destabilized, and it could so easily pull in the global superpowers. The consequences would be catastrophic.
It can feel really overwhelming to think about what can we do as individuals. Is there any way to actually make a difference?
I know it's easy to feel powerless when you're talking about conflicts like this, but there are things we can do. Stay informed, have conversations about these issues, challenge the simple narratives, and try to see things from multiple perspectives.
Support the organizations that are working to provide humanitarian aid, to promote peace, to encourage dialogue.
Exactly. Even small actions can make a difference. Change starts at the grassroots level. By raising awareness, educating ourselves and each other, and advocating for peace, we can create a better, more hopeful future for the Middle East and for the whole world.
That's a great point and a good message to end on. So that wraps up our deep dive into the Middle East. We covered a lot of ground today, but as we said, it's just a starting point.
It is. We've given you some context, some tools to think about, and now it's up to each of you to keep learning, stay engaged, and use your voice to advocate for a more peaceful world.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. The Middle East is complicated. It's constantly changing, but understanding what's going on there matters to all of us. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, stay hopeful.